Is your strategy shock-proof or just lucky? This video compares Jim Collins' disciplined organization building with Nassim Taleb's defense against rare black swan events. You'll discover when these strategies fail and how to combine them so you don't blow up when reality jumps instead of crawls. Stay for a modern case study showing the exact hybrid approach needed to survive. What if your years of experience is actually your biggest liability? Collins and Taleb are fighting different enemies, and that shapes how you should use them. Collins looks at decades of company data and says, the world is defined by chronic uncertainty, constant small disruptions, and a stream of surprises, so your main defense is to build a disciplined, values-driven organization with the right people and clear practices. Taleb looks at history and markets and says, the world is dominated by rare extreme events you don't see coming, so your main defense is to assume you're blind, stop over-trusting your stories, and structure your life and business so that surprises can't easily destroy you, and sometimes even help you. You can see the difference in how each talks about history. Collins quotes a historian. History is the study of surprises, then concludes that there will be no new normal, only a continuous series of not normal episodes, and that you handle this by doubling down on the right people and disciplined execution. Taleb argues that history doesn't crawl, it jumps, and that your big problem is that you only really understand events in the rearview mirror after you've made up a comforting story about why they were inevitable. So Collins is asking you, are you prepared to adapt constantly? While Taleb is asking, have you built something that can survive the one thing you never thought of? Imagine you run a mid-sized software company. You've had a good 5-year run, riding a trend everyone expects to continue. The wrong behavior here is to stare at the last 5 years of growth and assume more of the same. You hire aggressively for this one product. You plan as if the line will just keep sloping up, and you treat the recent past as your main guide. That's the mindset Taleb calls the narrative fallacy, turning a random streak into a story of inevitability. Using Collins alone, the right behavior is to recognize that uncertainty is chronic and to focus obsessively on first who, then what. You hire people who can adapt when the market shifts, not just people who fit the current play. You track a single number one metric that really shows health, and you create a culture that can change course when needed. In a world of frequent but not catastrophic change, that works very well. But Taleb would say you're still underestimating the tails. If a totally different technology wipes out your product category overnight, or regulation suddenly bans the way you collect data, no amount of incremental adaptation will save a business that has all its risk concentrated in one bet. You didn't prepare for the jump, you prepared for the crawl. So already you can see the tension. Collins helps you surf ongoing turbulence. Taleb wants you armored for the freak wave. Collins's answer is blunt. You can't control events, but you can control who's on your team and how you behave when the world tilts. His core claim is that the single most important hedge against uncertainty is not the perfect strategy, but getting the right people on the bus before you decide exactly where to drive it. He argues that uncertainty is now permanent, disruption is common, and even the most visionary leaders can't reliably pick which idea will win, but the right people can adapt as reality unfolds. Picture this. You're about to launch a new product in a market that shifts every few months. The wrong Collins-style move is to obsess over nailing the perfect idea and to hire specialists who only fit that one bet. If the idea fails, those people can't help you pivot. You end up stuck with a team that's optimized for a world that no longer exists. The right Collins move is to start with people who show character, learning ability, and alignment with clear core values, even if the exact role they'll play evolves. He uses the example of Ed Catmull at Pixar. Early on, all of our movies suck, and some original story concepts get thrown out entirely, but because the team is right, they iterate until they find a version that works. The idea is, a bad story plus great people can become a great film, but a great story plus the wrong people stays a bad film. Applied to your life or business, that means you hire for adaptability, not just current skills. You build relationships with people you'd want on the rope with you if you were climbing a scary, unknown mountain. You track a small set of truly vital metrics obsessively, so you can see reality early and adjust. Now take a concrete scenario. You're running a team at a fast-growing startup when a sudden downturn hits. Using Collins's philosophy, well, you would double-check that your key positions are held by people who can handle ambiguity and move those who can't into more narrow roles or out of the organization. Focus the whole team on one primary health metric, say cash runway or customer retention, and use it to guide decisions. Treat the crisis as another not normal episode and ask, how do we preserve our core values and people while adapting our tactics? The result, you might have to shrink, but your core remains intact. When the storm passes, the same people can help you rebuild in a different direction. If you misapply Collins, if you only copy the language about people and metrics but still cling to one rigid idea, your resilience becomes fake. You talk about first who, but still hire purely for this quarter's plan. You track metrics but ignore the big signals. You have discipline on paper but not in behavior. In present day, with technology shocks and regulatory jumps, Collins's framework is powerful but incomplete. It makes you good at adjusting to expected kinds of turbulence, but it doesn't by itself force you to confront how blind you are to unknown unknowns. Taleb starts from a more cynical place. Humans overvalue what they know and underweight what they don't. He uses Umberto Eco's library of thousands of books to make the point. The most valuable part is not the books you've read, but the unread ones, the anta-library, because they represent what you still don't know. A wise person defines themselves by that ignorance. For you, this means your knowledge trophies, your 10-year track record, your polished Q3 forecasts, your beautiful dashboards, can actually become blindfolds when they make you feel more certain than you should be. Your experience, your forecasts, and your reports can all become traps. You weave stories out of the past, then treat those stories like laws of nature. Taleb shows how you generalize from what you see, fall for confirmation bias, invent narratives, and ignore silent evidence, all the things that didn't happen or weren't recorded. Imagine you manage money or run a business that's been stable for 10 years. The wrong behavior here is to think, if something this bad could happen, I would have seen hints of it, and then to build tight forecasts around that belief. You load up on leverage, assume the world will stay within a familiar range, and treat rare events as negligible. The Taleb-style right behavior looks very different. You assume the data hides as much as it reveals. You design your exposure so that negative surprises can't easily destroy you, and positive surprises can help you. You seek optionality, many small bets instead of one big fragile one. Taleb's story of Giovanni Drogo, the officer who spends his life waiting for one big battle at the Bastiani fortress, shows a deeper dimension of fragility, the sweet trap of anticipation. Drogo delays his life in the city, waiting decades for an unlikely event that becomes his entire reason to live, only to miss it at the end. If you're waiting for your big break at one company, you're living like Drogo. You aren't just waiting, you are actively decaying because you've traded your agility for a single unlikely promise. Translate that to your career. If you pass on learning new skills, building new networks, or starting side projects because you're convinced this one role will eventually pay off, you're making Drogo's trade. The wrong behavior is to treat a fragile external event as your only path to success. The Taleb-informed alternative is you keep your day-to-day simple and survivable. You build a variety of small asymmetric upsides, projects or skills that cost little but can pay off big. You choose peers and communities that support this path because humans need local validation, and you want that validation to come from a group that values skepticism and experimentation, not blind hope. In modern times, with AI, markets, and regulation throwing out new black swans, Taleb's mindset protects you from overconfidence. But if you misapply it, you can slide into cynicism and paralysis. You stop committing to any path because any path might be wrong. You become Drogo in reverse, waiting for a perfect risk-free option that never appears. Let's put you into one specific situation. You're leading a 40-person tech company. Revenue has tripled in 3 years. Investors are excited. Then, almost overnight, a completely unexpected regulatory change and a new AI competitor hit at the same time, cutting your addressable market in half. First, imagine you've applied Collins well, but ignored Taleb. You've hired strong, values-aligned people who can adapt. You've built a culture around disciplined thinking, clear metrics, and the understanding that uncertainty is chronic, instability is permanent. You've emphasized your number one metric, say customer retention, and your team watches it weekly. When the shock hits, you react fast. Your people don't panic, they gather data, talk to customers, and propose new directions. You kill a few projects quickly, reassign talent, and maybe pivot to a different customer segment your team identified earlier as a possibility. Because you hired adaptable people, they don't fall apart when the old plan dies. The result, you take a hit, but you survive. Over the next 18 months, you stabilize at a smaller size with a different product mix. Your resilience comes from culture, people, and disciplined adjustment. Now imagine instead that you've applied Taleb well, but ignored Collins. You've always assumed you're more ignorant than you think. So you refused to over-concentrate risk. You kept debt low. You avoided betting the entire company on one client or one product. You built optionality by experimenting with several small products and markets on the side. You've made peace with the fact that history jumps, and your plans can't be precise. When the shock hits, your burn rate isn't deadly. One major product line is badly damaged, but you have a few other offerings that were never meant to be huge, just cheap options on the future. One of those happens to sit outside the new regulation's scope. You can quickly shift more energy into it. Your balance sheet acts like armor. Your portfolio of small bets acts like a lifeboat. But here's the catch. If you haven't done the Collins work, your organization might not be very disciplined. You may have a scattered culture, uneven talent, and poor execution habits. You have options on paper, but your team struggles to coordinate and turn them into a real focused new strategy. Now imagine the wrong way to combine them. You tell yourself you're a Taleb-style skeptic, but you still let a Collins-style growth story lull you. You say you believe in black swans, yet you keep adding fixed costs, assuming you'll handle whatever comes. You talk about first who, then what, but hire mostly for speed and short-term output, not true adaptability. When the shock hits, you're fragile both culturally and structurally. Finally, imagine the right hybrid. From Collins, you take the discipline of building a strong core team, clear values, and a habit of tracking a few crucial metrics that tell you the truth early. From Taleb, you take the humility to assume you're blind, to avoid catastrophic downside, and to spread your risk into small asymmetric bets instead of one grand narrative. In practice, that looks like you hire people who are both values-aligned and comfortable with uncertainty, and you reward them for telling you when your story doesn't match reality. You keep your core business lean and financially conservative, while constantly running a set of small experiments on the side. You accept that your best ideas might look stupid at first, and that the future will not respect your plans. When the next shock hits, your Collins core keeps the company steady. Your Taleb options give you places to jump. If your world is mostly about steady competition with occasional moderate shocks, a pure Collins playbook, first who then what, disciplined culture, clear metrics, is incredibly powerful. It will make you resilient against the constant grinding uncertainty that defines most days. But if you live in a domain where rare events can wipe you out, finance, tech, media, geopolitically exposed industries, a pure Collins approach can quietly fail because it doesn't force you to structurally respect the possibility of ruin. It makes you adaptable inside the story you already believe, not necessarily safe when the story itself collapses. On the other hand, a pure Taleb approach can be paralyzing. You might spend so much time spotting traps that you never build the organizational momentum required to achieve greatness. You'll see traps everywhere, hesitate to commit, and risk becoming Giovanni Drogo, waiting forever for the perfect moment or the perfect bet. So for building resilience against uncertainty and disruption, today the most effective approach is a rational hybrid. Use Collins to ensure your team is strong and brave enough to survive the climb, the kind of people you trust on the rope when the route gets vertical. Use Taleb to make sure you aren't climbing a volcano that's about to blow by limiting your downside and keeping real options open when the ground shifts under you. If your situation is stable, small, and mostly local, leaning heavily toward Collins will probably serve you best. If your exposure is global, leveraged, or tied to fast-moving technology, you can't afford to ignore Taleb. Your strategy will eventually fail, not because you executed badly, but because you misunderstood the game you were playing.